Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Josh Berthume. I'm the founder and CEO of Swash Labs. We're a full service creative and advertising agency located right here in Denton, Texas. We're about to start our 10th year in business, which we're very excited about. I give a number of presentations about branding and marketing. I always try and give um, advice that is as practical as I can and is modular and sort of usable for anybody that might be at any level, whether it's they've got a global brand and they just happen across it, or they're just starting out and they have a very small business. I thank you for your time. I know that it's valuable, and I hope that what I have to say today is a worthy exchange for that time. Swosh Labs was founded in 2010. We're, as I said before, a full service, fully integrated advertising, creative, and media agency. This means that we are sort of the way that ad agencies used to be built, in that creative media planning and strategy, media buying, measurement, analytics, research, graphic design, cinematography, copywriting, everything is all under one roof. We have a team full of long timers of about 11, I think is where we are now, and we're really comfortable being in that space because it allows us to uh, give every client a lot of personal attention early on. And when Swash Labs was getting started, I used to say that we don't build um, Kias, we build Lamborghinis, because every engagement, every project, everything we do for all of our clients is always sort of hand built and custom made for that client. The goal when we started Swosh Labs was to have a world-class shop that had the same quality of creative or thinking that you might find on in shops on either coast, but that was accessible to small businesses and nonprofits. The big break for a long time between that was that small businesses and nonprofits did not have multi-million dollar budgets to spend on TV or terrestrial radio or billboards, so they couldn't get all of the horsepower that you might get with a really big ad agency. And with the advent of digital marketing, and how much more affordable it was through digital to be able to reach a lot of people, and how much more measurable it was, and how much more efficient you could be with ad spend, it really sort of flattened the playing field and opened that up to small businesses and nonprofits. So our goal at the very beginning was to make a world-class advertising and branding shop experience available to companies that were in that space. Our clients over the last 10 years have included corporations, cities, educational institutions, political campaigns, advocacy groups, nonprofits, and entire federal agencies. I like to say that we um, do work that's just as good and work just as hard for a one-person startup as we do for a full federal department that's wanting to think really critically about how it communicates, whether inside or outside. Who am I? As I said, my name's Josh. I've been doing this for 22 years now. To fully date myself back to the dinosaurs, I started working in digital media before Google existed. And I have worked in digital media writing and creative direction that whole time. I founded Swosh Labs. What really drives me and drives my interest in marketing and communications and branding and all that sort of stuff is storytelling. Really is at the center of everything. I'm also just utterly fascinated by human behavior and communications philosophy. Some of this started in I believe it or not, my academic training is as a political scientist and a behavioral economist. And I've just always, the work that I have done has always been creative. I'm mostly compelled by by wanting to think about, why do people do what they do, and why do people think what they think. So that's going to inform a lot of what we're going to talk about today. The name of this presentation is The Truth About Branding. You guys are the first ones to get it. I appreciate you letting me try out some new material. But it is something that I think is very important for us, where we are as a society, where we are as consumers that think about brands and identify with brands and buy things, and where we are as either companies trying to brand ourselves, or marketing companies that are in service of trying to help brands tell a compelling brand story. At the center of marketing, and at the center of branding, at the center, like sort of the main part of what the truth about branding is that it is about storytelling. Storytelling is an extremely powerful force. It has shaped every major event in human history. If you think about it, either the historical perspective of something that happened or stories that led to something happening, it's always been a primary driver and something that's very fundamental just to the human experience in general. I took it out, but I used to have a slide in here about how the very first cave paintings that they ever found, or that were found, dated back almost 60,000 years ago, to pre-humans, to Neolithic Neanderthal, where someone at some point had a cave painting of a bull and a little guy, and they just wanted to say, like, we were here, and they wanted to tell a story. It's one of the earliest human instincts, and it drives everything we do. When you come to personal branding, when you come to thinking about your company and how people think of you and how that translates into marketing, your story is your identity. We're going to talk about what makes that story up, but if you really think about how big, huge brands think about story and think about the story they want people to tell about them, and then you think about um, new companies that are innovative, that have made great strides and they're doing interesting things, the story is always the driver, and how people become customers or how they gain market share or any of that stuff that people tend to be interested in. And in brand storytelling, the truth matters more than ever. This is due in large part to how humans take information in now. Certainly, the information ecosystem is radically different now than it was when I started work 22 years ago. It's very different than it was when Swosh Labs started 10 years ago, when we were focused on digital media and social media and how to build a brand and take advantage of sort of the new flattened, kind of democratized world where you didn't need huge resources or assets to get into a space where people could learn about your business. And honestly, it's changed radically just in the last couple of years. And technology, social media, devices, cell phones, all that stuff drives us into a new space where how we learn about brands, how we make decisions about what we buy, and where our loyalties lie in terms of products we like or things we like to do are driven a lot by storytelling. Um, when we think about storytelling as part of branding, you could do a whole series of presentations on strategy and why having a plan for what you want to do with your story, but I want to get to sort of the core truths about branding, but I did not want to omit this entirely. Strategy is important because you see when people are thinking about marketing. I know that Candace said that marketing isn't her strong suit. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, for a lot of people that run a business, it's not, because what their strong suit is what the business is about, right? Like no one that created a great product that they wanted to change the world or they really believed in, not a lot of those people are naturally good at marketing, because they're good at the thing that brought them to the product or the service that they've developed. um, Marketing is hard. Communicating as a brand is hard. It requires discipline, and it requires a lot of people to be in a space that they're not always, that doesn't always derive from a place of comfort. So some people will work really hard on a story for their brand, and a sort of a marketing story that they want to tell, and they generate it, and then they don't know what to do with it. They don't practically know how to tell that story, who to show it to, what methods or platforms or tools to use to get it out into the world. And then that brand story, no matter how good it is, doesn't do you a lot of good, because if it's not told, it can't do anything for you. And a lot of pressures when people are starting a business. There's a lot of sort of budgetary pressure on, I've got to spend money on this, I have to pay myself, I've got to buy inventory, or I've got to pay for people, or sort of whatever the cost pressures are that come along with running a business. That can often lead people to make cuts in their marketing budget or to deprioritize marketing until later, because they feel like, oh, well, as soon as I get a little more capital or I have a good month or two, then I'll be able to pay attention to marketing and I can really focus on it. But if your story never has a chance to be told, it's wasted. And the deprioritization of brand storytelling and marketing often is a huge barrier to success for a lot of companies, because it's hard, or they don't exactly know how to do it, or it's not clear, and it eats up resources that they might want to use on other things. So they naturally kind of stay away from it. And I'm here to tell you that that is a mistake. And hopefully I can give you some practical advice about how to reorient your thinking about branding and marketing, and how to make it a vital part of everything you do, and part of your business. Now, The brand identity process with Swosh Labs is one that we've thought about a lot. Unify, Simplify, Amplify was on our door at the rail yard, and it was on our door at the office before that, because we really believe in it. It's a process for how a brand's identity can be created and how it can be solidified, and then really it's a directive for how to go out and communicate about your brand out in the world. Developing the story of your brand is hard work and it's uncomfortable work sometimes, but it's work you should absolutely do. Our Unify, Simplify, Amplify describes the process that we take in terms of helping a company develop their brand identity. It starts with Unify, which is you get everyone on the same page telling the same true story. A good example of this that I like to use is that no matter what kind of client it was, if we'd get in the room with the board or the executive team or the founders, however many people there were in the room, when I would ask the fundamental first question, which is, what do you do and why, we would get that many answers, because everyone comes to it with a different construction, not just of what they think about the business, but about reality, right? Because everyone's lens for how they have learned about a thing, how they come to wanting to participate in a business or a group, it's different for everyone because everyone is different. Truly successful brands have boiled that all the way down so that everybody from the president down to the guy that sweeps the floors knows exactly what the company is about. If you think about a company like Nike, they make premium sports equipment for amateur athletes. If you think about a company like Volkswagen, they make the precision engineered premium automobiles for the middle class market, right? They're not supercars, but they are very well made, and that pride of craftsmanship comes through in what they do. Um, Coca-Cola now has sort of inverted into this branding wormhole where forever it was just being associated with, hey, this is a fun drink you have when you're having a good time. And then in the 80s and the 90s, it became always the real thing. And now it's just the logo, because you remember drinking Coke when you were sitting by the pool and you were having lunch when you were a kid, or you remember having it on picnics, or you just really like to have Coke when you go to the movies, or whatever it is. They've reached a level of ubiquity where they just have to show you a hint of the brand, and you associate it with everything they want you to associate it with, but they never stray out of that line of just, hey, we're a delicious fizzy drink, right? It's always like they've stuck to this thing, and they've tried different products and have branched out into different spaces, but the core of the Coca-Cola brand always sort of lives where it is. So the first step when you get everybody in the room, let's say it was Coca-Cola, but they're not Coca-Cola yet, they're a new soft drink company, you would say, what do you do and why? Everybody has different answers. You really try and boil that down to its essence of, and I don't like the thing that people do sometimes where they're like, describe it in 7 words or less. Brevity is good. That means that you've done the work to get to where you can explain what it is that you do and why in a concise way. But that's a parlor trick, and you're sort of skating over the work you need to do, which is to really seriously interrogate, what do you do and why do you do it? That's step one of the process. Step two is simplify, which is what you make that story accessible to everyone else, inside or outside. Now, I just said sometimes you skate over the hard work and boil things down to 7 words, and that's sort of a lazy way to think about it. But the second step, which is simplify, is you might have a product that's very complicated, very sophisticated, requires to really understand maybe the details of how it works, requires a lot of intense interior knowledge. But to enjoy it as a consumer, or to buy it as a service, you don't necessarily need to know every detail of how everything works. A good example of a brand that does a good job of kind of overcoming the complexity of what they do and just sort of boiling it down into the product is Tesla, right? Uh, the technology behind that's an onion you can keep peeling and learning about as much as you want to, but on the outside it's just, hey, this is an electric car that looks cool and works great. That's where they landed. We'll talk a little bit about their decision to not do paid advertising in a little bit, and how that's not really technically true. But the brand identity for Tesla, for a very complicated, very sophisticated, technologically advanced product, does not lean into that sophistication as a necessary element for the storytelling, because the product is great, and that's central to how some of this plays with the rest of the structure of your brand. But sometimes when people have a sophisticated process or a product that is great for subtle reasons that aren't immediately obvious, they want to tell the story of that sophistication and think that that supplants what a brand's identity should be. And that's just not the case. This is when in the old branding textbooks they used to talk about um, features rather than benefits, and you list like a bunch of technical specs that are great, but the what you really want to say is that you can have 1,000 songs in your pocket like they did with the first iPod. That's sort of the basic premise there. And then when we get past that, we get to amplify. This is when you tell your story to people who should care. Now, you've unified your brand identity, you've simplified it so that it's ready to go out into the world. Amplifying means that you are now telling that story actively to people that should hear it or should want to hear it or could be your customers. Sometimes that means paid advertising. Sometimes that means earned media. Sometimes that means that you do an aggressive content marketing campaign where you're just telling your story on a platform where you can build an audience and not necessarily have to pay for marketing. And really, like, how that works for a brand really plays into what works for the brand. Some companies have big advertising budgets, some don't. Some have small advertising budgets that need to be supplemented with content marketing or traveling sales or good storytelling. All of that requires, no matter how much advertising money you have, no matter how much budget you have, if your brand identity is not solid, if it does not ring true, and you don't have a compelling story to tell about what you're doing and why you do it, then no amount of marketing budget is going to save that. On the other hand, if you do have a compelling brand story to tell, you can do a lot with not a lot of resources, so long as you do it consistently. You don't need a huge marketing budget in order to be successful in marketing your product. Now, this gets into where it tends to always fall apart, which is with Amplify. Most organizations run into trouble here because, as we talked about, you've got a lot of cost pressures as a company. You're making decisions about where to spend money, where to spend resources. In this case, resources doesn't just mean money. It also means time and attention and effort. And the way to overcome shortfalls in other resource categories is discipline. And that's where you make a plan and you stick with it. You do things with intentionality. You might only have $100 a month to spend on marketing. If that's the case, you've got to supplement some of those resources with time and attention, right, and effort. But if you do it consistently, then you can overcome this step where most brands fall apart and where most businesses run into real trouble, which is the active action of telling your story. Successful brands understand this wisdom from jazz drummer. I'm an old drummer, so I always like to include Art Blakey in here. He said, if you're not appearing, you're disappearing. Now, to him, that meant you've got to play gigs. You've got to be out in the world. You've got to let people know what you're doing. And in that sense, the way that Art approached this was, it didn't matter if he wasn't the best drummer on earth, but if he worked the most and he showed up in front of everyone and was consistently playing at shows and doing what he did, he didn't have to be as good as Gene Krupa or Max Roach or Buddy Rich. He was in front of people all the time. He was in demand. He was reliable. It built into his brand identity that he was there all the time and he could be relied upon as a good member of an ensemble and as someone that you could count on to play a good show. That translates to a lot of other things in life, right? It's not obvious, but in today's world, you don't need global brand media money to be successful, but you've got to have the discipline that they do. No one, and these examples worked better before the pandemic, but I still like to think of them in terms of this way. No one at Disney says, let's cut the marketing budget because sales were down last quarter. Right? No one says we've got to roll back on these marketing efforts because attendance was down for the events that we wanted to hold. That's not the way that big brands think about it. They might make changes, big changes in strategy, but they understand that it's not a faucet that you turn on or off from external needs. They understand that you've got to be out in the world telling your story, showing people who you are and what you do and why. in order to maintain the market share that they worked so hard to get, or to grow their market share in places they're trying to work. So all of that is sort of a big overview on brand identity and marketing, and why consistency is super important, and how resources don't always mean money, and sometimes it just means time that you might dedicate to social posts or blog posts, or going out and appearing at showcases, or traveling sales, or just being on the phone and calling people and saying, hey, I have this great product, here's what I want you to do with it. It's not always about having a big budget. Really, it's about telling your story consistently and all the time. Now we get to the truth about branding, and this really is in 4 parts. Number 1 is that your story is your brand. Your story, the story about your product or your service, is the brand identity, and that's even more true now than it used to be. There might have been a time in the past where having a prestige brand, having a badge on an automobile, like Mercedes-Benz, for instance, people would just look at that and they would know from the story that they had inherited, or that they had been that had received over time, in terms of like maybe the court of public opinion or whatnot, that this is a good car and I don't need to doubt that. The way that mass communication works now, people have seriously individualized their construction of what a brand is in terms of how they think about it, because of how they think about everything else now. The level of input that humans receive now from cell phones and from the internet is very different than it used to be. The news is no longer sort of appointment TV. There's the filters for how and where information comes from have seriously changed from what they used to be back when traditional thinking about branding and advertising was really developed. So now it's not just the overall maybe com score or big public perception of your brand that matters. It's generally boiled down to what the individual understands about your brand in terms of their personal construction of it. That's why your story, as someone understands it, is really broken into 2 halves. One is your product or your customer experience is 50% of that story, meaning whether it's a story that's related to someone else that's thinking about buying your product, or their experience with having bought your product or used your service for the first time, that is a big part of the construction of how people understand what your brand is and what it means to be your company and why you do what you do. The story that you tell as the brand is the other half of that. Used to be you could overcome maybe having a bad product or not having great customer service, because maybe your marketing was so good and kind of the weight of public opinion would seat your brand identity in a space where you could take maybe not having the best product, or maybe not working with the highest quality ingredients, or whatever that might translate to in terms of a company or a product or a service. Now they have achieved full parity, because anyone can come out, and it doesn't have to be an article in the New York Times. Anyone can come out and say, I had this experience with this brand and it was bad, or I had this experience with this brand and it was not where I wanted it to be. And then they're going to find an audience which will communicate to them and with them, and will sometimes we'll rally around that point, or we'll sometimes argue against it. And how the audience for your brand reacts to individual reports like that have to do heavily with the story that you tell and how you tell it. And all that boils down to number 4, which is that the truth matters now more than ever. It is much harder now for a company to get away with not caring about what the customer experience is at the expense of, we've got to make the bottom line, or we've got to do these things, so it's okay to use ingredients or materials that are not as good. It is much harder now for companies to exist and stay successful in a place where they don't act responsibly, or they don't really care about whether the product is great or whether the brand experience is great. That's more important now than ever. And that means that the truth about what that brand experience is and what kind of company it is and how they operate is more important than ever before. So if you are just getting started, if you're early on in having a business, you have an opportunity to do it right from the beginning. But I've got a little parenthetical here, which is any day can be a beginning, which means that if you haven't known necessarily how to attack branding or marketing, if you've been in business for a while, but you know you need to seriously interrogate how you're going about it and you want to do a better job of telling the story of your brand, you can start today. It's okay. Like there's no, you don't have to haul sort of any wreckage with you. You can any day can be a beginning for how you begin to effectively tell your brand story. Number one, your product or your service has to be great. It has to. You've got to deliver a great product or a great service or a great brand experience. Um, and if you do, and that's easy, right? Because people get into business or they get into doing a thing because they love to do it and they are good at it. That sometimes is why focus is pulled from marketing, because they want to do the thing they got into business to do. So, step one, make sure your product or your service is great. Work on that, get that in line, do what it needs to be. If it's already there, or you feel like your momentum is going to carry you to a place where it is going to be there, then you can really start to focus on number two, which is you've got to do the work to build your brand story, and you have to do that work consistently. There's kind of two phases to this. One is sort of deciding what the story is, and then the next step is telling it consistently. And when I say consistently, I mean, if you are going to market yourself on Facebook, which is not a bad plan, plenty of businesses do that and are successful, or just generic social media platform, Instagram, Faceagram, whatever you want to call it, you have to do it consistently. You have to consistently tell your story. And by that, I mean, every couple times a week, you've got to have some sort of a content item that goes out that you have worked on, that is, you've paid attention to detail, things are spelled right, you don't use 18 hashtags, you have an understanding of the platform. And this doesn't mean you've got to go out and shoot like a feature film and it's got to be incredible, but little things that pay attention to detail, having good audio quality. If you don't have big studio lights, you don't need that. You can shoot something with a cell phone and it'll look great. But you got to know sort of a little bit of the rules about how to do that. Shoot it outside in the sunlight or by a window or things like that. Little bits of effort to make that consistent storytelling on that platform work compound over time. Momentum is really real. If you consistently are making posts, and telling your brand story about, this is a product I have, this is what we did, we helped this person, here's a new feature, whatever that might be, you got to do that a couple times a week, every week, all year. If you do that over time, it adds up and that good stuff compounds. Same thing with you decide you want to do content marketing and you're going to write blogs on your website. Um, Writing a blog a week or a blog every 10 days about a part of your product, working hard on those blog posts, and they don't have to be 1,500 words long, they can be 200 or 300 words long, but this is your website where you're telling the story of both your business and your product. If you do that consistently over time, the benefit you will get at your website, the SEO benefits from that will help you drive customers to your website over time. It's like putting pennies in the bank that you're going to earn interest on. That interest compounds, and it's certainly not the quick sort of generation of leads that you could achieve if you had a bunch of media budget, but you don't need it. You don't need a bunch of money in order to drive leads if you do it right from the beginning and you do it consistently over time. Now, for a bigger company that has more resources, you've got to drive leads because you've got to have revenue and stuff like that. I always say that being consistent in terms of how you spend those resources that you have, in terms of how you have that money, just the same way you want to be consistent in spending time and effort, you also want to be consistent in spending money. So if you're going to make a marketing budget and you're going to buy ads, whether it's on Google or on a billboard or TV or whatever it is, you should make a plan where you can buy it consistently all year long. So you don't every month have to make a choice between the marketing budget you set out for yourself or, paying the light bill. Whatever you do should be a thing that you can do reliably, consistently, and comfortably every week, every month for a whole year. That's how you should think about the consistency and the discipline required to tell your story. Again, you don't need a bunch of money. It can just be time and effort, but whatever it is, you've got to be able to do it consistently. Unify, simplify, amplify. We talked about that, but that does is the structure that you want to take seriously, both in terms of your brand story and your identity. as well as how you tell your story out in the world. And really, like the last thing I just said about doing something consistently all the time, you got to discover what actually practically works for you, what works for your business in terms of the resources you have, the finances you have, whatever that is. And it's got to be what works for you as the chief evangelist and chief enthusiast. You should be pumped about your thing. You should really get into it and understand that you personally, especially in a very small business, are going to drive a lot of the tone and a lot of how people learn about what it is that your business does. So whatever it is you're going to do in order to market or tell your story consistently, it's got to work for you. So have it. If it's uncomfortable at the beginning, try and figure out a place where it can land so that you're comfortable doing it a couple times a week or once a week or every day or whatever it requires. And it might be blog posts, it might be posts on Instagram, it might be going to trade shows, sort of. I think it universally applies to whatever activity is going to be most helpful in helping you sell your business or your service. You've just got to be able to do it consistently. When you get in this space, when you're ready to make this new start, you've got to ask yourself these questions. Number one, what story should I tell? If you've done your brand identity work and you are telling a true story about your terrific product, then that brand identity work, if you've run through Unify, Simplify, Amplify, will inform a lot of what the story should be. Sometimes a story is going to be specifically about how a product is made or the workmanship that goes into it. Sometimes it's about the quality of service or what differentiates you from competitors. Sometimes it's about the customer experience that people have when they are your client or your customer. But if you think carefully about what your identity is and why you want to get into what you're doing, Nike, again, premium equipment for amateur athletes. Swosh Labs, we wanted to have a global ad agency level experience available to small businesses and nonprofits, right? Those stay consistent all the time. If you're hearkening back to that main hook, that story is gonna fill in a lot of the blanks in terms of what your story should be, and that'll make sense. Where and how and to whom should I tell it? That is determined a lot by the resources you have available, and also about where your audience is. If you sell pizza, Facebook, Instagram might not be a bad place to tell a story or build a brand, because people on Facebook and Instagram buy pizza, right? But if you've got a pizza that's really great and also very affordable, and you're in a college town, maybe you think about ways to get your brand in front of college students because they will also buy pizza, right? So you're thinking about where's my customer. When you're working with a big startup, a big early question that an investor will ask is, do you have a customer yet? How do you get to your first customer? Even with a retail business like pizza or jeans or insurance or whatever it is that you're selling, you can ask yourself that same question, and whatever the most true answer is should influence where you tell the story, how you tell it, and to whom you should tell it. You should ask yourself if it's possible for you to spend more money or time or effort to grow the audience for the story you want to tell. You don't want to talk to the same 100 people all the time, because either you're going to have a service that one of those 100 people will buy and then won't need for a long time, or they'll only be able to buy it once every week or 2 weeks reasonably, or once a quarter or something along those lines. So it's useful, once you've determined what the main audience is for your product or your service, to think how to grow that audience. With social media and with digital media, sometimes that answer is pretty easy, because you can say, all right, I'm building this audience, and yes, show me everyone that likes pizza, and I'm in this geography. Well, now let me expand that geography and show me everyone that's interested in takeout or Italian food. Or, there's a lot of tools on these platforms that can help you do that. It's not bad to think in those same terms, even if you have a service or a product that doesn't lend itself to digital marketing very well. All that is logical targeting for who might be interested in what you want to sell. And if you've done all the stuff up until now and you've got a true good brand story about your product and your product is great, you can ask those same questions that Facebook's ad targeting thing would ask you, and use that to inform where you should take flyers or where you should go to an in-person event, which of course is a different dynamic now, or what online forums you should join to talk about your product and how to sell it. And then the last thing on this page is, am I building a resilient audience? That is about the truth of your brand, right? As you are building a brand and as you're telling your brand story, the truth, remember, is important. So you should not be afraid to think of how you are telling your story as also ways to work a channel for customer service or customer experience. In these communications, whether it's a flyer or on digital or out in the real world, whatever it is, your brand voice and your personality are vital. That means you're not a robot. You're not. Let's go back to our pizza metaphor. You got to be excited about your pizza, right? You can't just be. Your whole vibe can't be you want pizza or not, whatever, right? Like no one's gonna buy that. You're not gonna compete with Domino's. Like Pizza Hut is out here yelling that no one out pizzas the Hut. You've got to bring some sort of an energy that's specific to why your product is great, and you got to communicate that through however you are telling your story, whatever medium that takes place. If you have core values, Terrence was talking about how he's got a company where he wants to build aftermarket exhausts for performance cars that sound like wild animals, and that the proceeds from that are going to go to help protect wild animals in conservation efforts. Like that's a core value that's baked right into the story. I got that from 10 seconds of him telling me a thing. The storytelling opportunities built into that are legion, and that you should always lean on that and think about, what makes me special, what makes me unique, what do I love about this thing that I'm doing. Let me have that be a part of the story that I'm telling. And then your engagement should be real. You should use social media if you are using it as a customer service and a customer experience channel. You, this is part of the truth. Making a mistake, somebody having a legitimate grievance, an error. No one is perfect. Everyone's going to mess up sometimes. Sometimes your pizza is not going to be everything that you would hope it to be. It will fall short of the glory that you want your pizza always to be. Own that, right? If someone shows up on Lacey's pizza page and says, "Hey, I ordered a pizza and it wasn't good," you shouldn't think about that as, "Oh, I'm being cyberbullied and I can't let this stand and I've got to kick and ban this person." You should think about it as an opportunity to have a public display of what your brand experience is like. And if it's a mistake that you legitimately made, own that. Say, listen, I'm sorry that this was your experience. Let me make it up right to you. Work through that, and as much as feels comfortable out in the open. And then what happens is that person and all their friends see that you are cool and reasonable, as opposed to really rowdy and angry. And it'll help you develop your brand identity as it's really good pizza, and also they're human. We're all human, and everybody knows that. That doesn't mean that in these channels you should put up with harassment, people that show up and just start yelling like super mean or terrible things. Those people you can kick and ban. You don't owe trolls anything. You don't have to waste your time on that. But if someone has a customer service issue, you should put yourself in a place where you feel comfortable handling that in the forums in which you are telling your brand story, because then that becomes a true part of your brand story. Truth equals trust, and trust equals a loyal audience and a loyal customer base. And if they know they can trust you to do the right thing, no matter what that means in whatever sort of business or product you have, then that is going to be a compelling element of a true brand story that other people will observe, will absorb, and will actually go out in the world and evangelize for you. Enthusiasm, confidence, and truth. You got to tell your story with enthusiasm. We just talked about that. Think of Oprah. My favorite version of that is Stan Lee. Stan Lee believed in Marvel Comics when they were doing great during the Silver and Golden Ages. He believed in Marvel Comics when it was an extremely difficult time for comic books and the whole industry was almost going bankrupt. And he believed in Marvel Comics right up until Disney bought them, and then they became the biggest film franchise in the history of the world. His whole vibe never changed. It was, we are selling superhero stories, and we are telling stories about the human condition and giving people something to believe in, right? No matter what character, no matter what story that ended up being, he really believed in that. Oprah, when she became sort of Oprah the brand, has gone out of her way to say, let me tell you about the things I'm enthusiastic about. Let me tell you about the things I enjoy. That became something like Oprah's book club, where she was like, hey, I have people that look to me for lifestyle advice, that look to me for ways that I should think about the world, or I should think about my life. People looked to her as sort of almost like a philosophical leadership position, by virtue of her publishing and media and the things that she put out in the world. She used that to say, hey, I love these things. Let me tell you about these things that I love. They weren't even necessarily her products, but she used that enthusiasm to elevate and amplify things that she liked. And I think that you can do a little bit of that, especially if you are in a small business community like Denton, which is great. And all the small businesses around here tend to support each other. I'm wearing a bearded monk shirt today because I love those guys and I shop there. And also, like, they've got a brand identity, which is we love beer, we sell beer, we'll tell you about beer. And it's pretty simple, but they take it really seriously. And I like that. So that sort of translates to being a part of the community. There's not really a downside of it, and you can support your fellow entrepreneurs. If you believe in what you're doing enough to have started a business and to have developed products and to go through all this disruption, and to sort of reorient your life around, this is what I am doing now, you got to believe that other people will care about it. That's where part of the enthusiasm comes from. Sometimes we'll do all the work for the brand identity and we'll get ready to tell the story, and then we'll get sort of the feedback, which is a little bit of imposter syndrome, where someone will say, why would they care necessarily about what the company culture is like here? Or why would somebody care about this little detail about how this product is made? And the reason people will care about it is because you care about it. People like to talk about their stuff. And if you like the stuff that you do well enough to try and sell it to other people, you have to believe that the stuff that you really care about and the stuff that you're doing is going to be stuff that other people care about as well. I just said stuff a whole lot, but it's really true. That enthusiasm translates through. And if you are pumped about a thing that you are selling and doing, other people will be too. If you sell pizza or an app or custom drapes or coffee, you got to be really excited about how great your thing is. And you can and should broadcast a message to the world with enthusiasm, joy, and confidence. And you got to do it without yelling. You got to do it without the hard sell. We, as an agency, sort of have a no hard sell policy. We don't want to yell at people that would not normally care about the product. My father sold cars, and the thing that I always compare it to is, you see ads for car dealerships, and it's like, come on down, we got hot dogs for the kids, and I'm going to yell at you to like prices and model names and numbers. And it's always sort of a slightly distressed looking guy standing out in the wind, and you can barely hear what he's saying, but like he's going to yell at you for the whole of this TV ad, and they're going to run it all weekend. Like, sure, I am sure that works for people who wander into the room and are like, hey, I need a new car today. Right? But that's not necessarily a way to build brand loyalty. That's not a way to intrigue people. And it's certainly not, I think, a strong method that works today the same way that it might have worked in the 80s, when there were only a few channels to get in front of people, and people learned about things in a very different way than they do now. Last words here. If you don't tell your story won't be told. And that's no way to live or grow a business. You have to tell your story. You have to be your own chief evangelist. You've got to be honest with yourself about what that means in terms of how you tell it, how consistently you can tell it, and how much energy and resources you can devote to that process. But you also have to be honest with yourself that you have to devote time and energy and resources to that process. It is a vital part of letting people know about your product, your story, and it's a vital part of growing a brand. And now more than ever, if that story rings true, if it is a true reflection of you, your values, what your customer experience is like, what your brand experience is like, what your product experience is like, then that will find purchase more easily, it will find a bigger audience, and it will bring you more success as an entrepreneur. And that is the end of the deck. I just talked for a whole lot all in a row, but I am now happy to take questions or hear any thoughts anyone might have had about that.
Thank you, Josh. That was great. I definitely laughed a whole lot when you're describing the car commercials from the 80s.
It's
Yeah.
real, right? Everybody remembers that.
Yeah. Alrighty. It looks like,
So,
oh, sorry, Terrence. Go ahead.
oh, well, I was just about to say, So whenever I kind of like go to learn about social media and stuff, it always seems like I have to learn from someone else who's experienced with it, but it doesn't really seem like there's much information coming from the social media platforms themselves. Like, is there like a, I guess a source of information that I can find that's, relevant with what's going on with the social media in terms of, how to do things to maximize exposure?
So and we struggle with this as an ad agency that deals a lot with the platforms. The platforms are constantly changing. Facebook is a live developed ecosystem, meaning that there will be whole days or parts of weeks where big chunks of the back end just don't work because they're like, well, we're working on it. Um, and then they'll have a new feature, and sometimes they do a good job of explaining it, and sometimes they don't. This is why for small businesses, we recommend pick one platform and get really good at it, as opposed to trying to do a bunch of them. Because if you are in the platform all the time and you're familiar with sort of how it all looks and how it all fits together, as they change things, that's not so disruptive to you. Whereas if you're trying to do 4 or 5 things and you just sort of barely have a grasp of how they all work, if something radical happens, it's going to upset the apple cart in a really big way. So, I would say that if you've got money to spend on ads, then you could focus, say, on Facebook or Instagram. Facebook and Instagram, it's easy to buy on both because because they're owned by the same company. And if you buy ads on Facebook, you sort of automatically buy ads on Instagram for now. Like that's how that works now. If you don't have a lot of money and you've got a sort of a lifestyle brand or something that's very visual, Instagram is great for building a brand because you can sort of use hashtags and interactions to get in front of people with what should be compelling content, and then that can help you grow that audience. As far as learning how to use those platforms, I think that Facebook does a good job of having general sort of usage guides. Like if you go to facebook.com/ads, or facebook.com/marketing or small business or something like that, they a couple times a year will put out some good PDFs and white papers that have a general explanation of how it all works, a general explanation of how to read their measurement and metrics, and then a couple of use cases that say a bike shop used us for this or somebody else used us for this. All that being said, I think that there is a good way in there for Instagram and Facebook. Um, I think that the best teacher is experience. So I think that making small bets and using one platform and trying to get good with it, and you can spend $5 on Facebook ads and learn something interesting about who saw it and who did what and that sort of thing, right? So it really, you've got to be curious about it and you've got to be willing to experiment and try a couple of things here and there. I think the barrier to entry there is a lot lower than trying to build your own email marketing program. And even though those platforms are much more user friendly than they used to be, like you got to kind of have a bachelor's degree in Google Analytics to sort of understand what some of those stats and metrics mean. That doesn't mean you can't build an email list from scratch at in-person events or whatever it is, and have a compelling interchange with an email audience. But in terms of like really learning how to use a platform, I would say that pick one, try to get good with it, and that could be Facebook, it could be Instagram, it could be make sure your website has Google Analytics on it and write blogs and sort of see how the traffic works and where that comes from. It requires some homework and some effort, but if you look into that and try to focus, especially once you've been able to determine which platform is going to work best for you, then I think there's a lot of ground you can make up there in terms of learning how to use the platform and then getting your sea legs under you and understanding sort of how they might change and shift over time, and how that shouldn't be disruptive to you because you've got experience with the platform and you sort of know what to expect. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I actually had another question. It pertains to like, would you recommend like getting a separate device from your personal device to run social media off of, or you don't see a conflict in that?
I don't, I mean, unless you've got some people in the C3 and C4 space have to be really careful about what resources are specified for what you kind of use. So that's a question that I don't know enough about to answer specifically, but I know that's a thing that comes up sometimes. I think that you can do enough with different accounts and the how to manage your platforms. So that's so long as you're careful and you're not tweeting from the company account on your personal account or making accidents like that. I don't think that's super necessary in sort of general business terms, unless there's a C3 or C4, or if you're a government contractor and you've got clearance and you've got to have specific devices that meet specific specifications. That might be a reason to do that. But other than that, I don't think that's necessarily required.
Okay.
Donna, yes.
I had a quick question. It's like, what kind of tools do you use to set up your marketing calendar and your schedule for things? Do you use like Trello or Asana or?
Well, for project management inside of Swosh Labs, we use Teamwork, and we've been with Teamwork for a very long time. It's like most project management stuff. It started off for software developers, but they've taken a lot of good feedback and have built the platform out now in a very usable and sort of very affordable way to where you can set tasks and build calendars and have reminders, and it's good for teams. And I know some individuals that use it really well also. I've also heard great things about Asana. I know some shops run entirely on Trello and feel super good about it. So in that, I would say really, like, if you try something out and it is a slog and you're not having a good time using it, try something else. Like keep sort of auditioning systems until you get something that makes sense to you and works really well. I really, for another company that I run, I really wanted to make Hello work, which is sort of another project management, but it's very visual and sort of in a different way. And it's so cool, and I love their ads, and I was like, man, this is going to work great for this. And I beat my head against it for 3 months until I just figured out, like, this does not work for me, and I can't, like, it just doesn't work. That's nothing about the product. Like, I'm sure it's great and they're doing fine and tons of people love it, but just for me in my particular space, it just wasn't working. So don't fall into the trap of thinking you've got to use a certain tool or platform because it seems like you should, or like everyone else uses it or something like that. What works best for you, and this is true in marketing, storytelling, project management, whatever it is what works best for you. So
right. I guess I'm trying to learn how to automate some more of my, projects and stuff like that. So it's more about automation. I mean, I use MailChimp, and I've tried Trello. I keep it more as a list making thing rather than anything else. But
yeah, and that works pretty well for that. And I don't think anyone has really solved the equation of, let me have my all-in-one marketing platform that really truly automates a lot of stuff. But I think that in terms of calendaring and sort of setting up your infrastructure, something like Teamwork would probably, you should give that a shot. I would try that. And then certainly inside of the platforms like Facebook or Twitter or something like that, you can schedule things ahead of time and automate some of that to an extent. So we have some clients that kind of sit themselves down on Monday and they're like, all right, here are my baseline posts for the week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I know that's going to go up. This blog post is going to auto-publish later. They get ahead of the game a little bit, and then they drop back in to do interactions or engagements as those posts go out and perform.
I wish I was that disciplined. Yeah.
But then there are some people that just have a paper list, and we get together and say, here's the calendar, and here's, we made a paper calendar that says on these days do these things, and that just works best for them. Mm-hmm. And I try as much as I can in whatever kind of system I'm developing or whatever kind of plan we're putting together, to make it as platform agnostic as possible, just so that we can make it work for whoever is going to be actually doing the work.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to have to sign off. I have a client. So thanks again.
Well,
thanks, Donna. Yeah. We're at the top of the hour. So that sounds like a good kind of closing for Q&A. But thanks so much, Josh. A super special lunch and learn for Global Entrepreneurship Week, for sure.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope that was useful. And then if anybody wants to get a hold of me or ask me any questions about other things, it's just josh@swashlabs.com.
All righty. Thank you so much. I hope you guys have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.
Tomorrow we have the Denton Startup Crawl that's being released at 1 p.m. So yeah, tune in for that.
Take care,
All
everyone.
right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.